voice acting, and was Goofy your very first gig in '87? And also, what did you do for work before your VOE?
Okay, kind of a little backstory. I grew up in a little town, Pratt, Kansas, which is west of Wichita, about 70 miles. They didn't have much of anything in the way of showbiz or anything, but I always loved cartoons. And I was one of those kids who I just practiced voices and run around. And I think in the old days, I mostly saw like the Looney Tunes, of course, Bugs Bunny, and I'd run around the house going, "Oh, brother, ain't I a stinker?" And my dad would look at me and say, "There's something wrong with him," And it was just kind of jokes and never thought that it'd turn into anything. Well, long story short, in high school, my friends found out I could do voices and stuff. And when I got old enough to drive, we'd drive through things like Burger King and McDonald's, and they'd say, "Order the weird voice." And I'd do, Mr. Haney from Green Acres. "I'd like a Whopper with cheese." And Arnold the Pig would like a Coca-Cola, and they'd look, and my friend, "That's really cool, man." And so I started doing just little bits and voices like that, never thinking that it'd really turn into anything. I went to the University of Kansas, got a degree in broadcast journalism, kicked around in radio for a number of years, and on radio, they didn't care. There were little podunk stations in Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas, and they only cared that you played the records and did the commercials, and anything else you could do was kind of your thing. So I would just invent characters, and I'd bring on characters just to pass the time, really, and just try and do stuff, And at the time, there was a DJ named Wolfman Jack, who was nationwide. He had a deep voice, kind of like this. I say, "Bill, it's great being on your radio show." "Hey, Wolfman, hey, thanks for coming on the show," and just kind of start doing stuff. And people would think, "Oh, they got Wolfman Jack on our station." We didn't know anything about copyright or anything like that. Could have gotten sued, but we didn't. And so I did that for a number of years until I got into stand-up comedy in Dallas back in 1982, and at a place called the Comedy Corner. And it was on just kind of I went there one night, and they had an open mic night, and people just went up and did 5 minutes of stand-up, and I thought, I'm going to try and do that. So the next week I went up, and the house comic became a big name in comedy, Bill Engvall. And he was a house comic, and he was the first one and said, I think you got something. You ought to do that. You ought to give it a shot. So I went back and forth and did that for a number of months, and then started traveling the South at comedy clubs, doing comedy clubs. And I did that from 1982 to 1986. And I decided then to go out to Hollywood on the advice of an agent I was able to get in Dallas, who said, "All the voices you do, you ought to go out to Hollywood to see what happens." I went out, and about 5 months later, I got a call to my agent, and they said, "Do you do any of the Disney characters?" Because at the time there were 4 or 5 Mickeys, Donalds, Goofies, and stuff, and they wanted to settle on one particular voice for each character. And I said, "Yeah, I can kind of do a Mickey Mouse, and, gosh, oh boy." I'd play with that voice. And Donald's tough to do. I can't really do him. I can go, that's about all. But of course, Goofy was right in the wheelhouse. And he was my favorite Disney character. They hired me in January of 1987, and I've been doing it ever since. So that is kind of a short version of my career.
Absolutely. All right, so your first film gig on screen was RoboCop. What challenges did you face from moving to VO to on-screen acting?
Okay, RoboCop was the first movie that I did, big movie, back in Dallas. I actually did that in Dallas before I was doing Goofy. And that was just kind of an audition, because my degree was in broadcast journalism, so I could kind of do that newscaster kind of thing. And they wanted a newscaster, auditioned for it, got to do a couple of scenes in that movie, never knowing that would turn into a big thing. And I learned that it's much nicer to do voiceover because you're in a nice air-conditioned studio, whereas that RoboCop was in August of 1986. It was in Dallas. It was about 96 degrees. And Peter Weller in the RoboCop outfit was dying. You know, after every take, they'd have to blow air up his sleeve to keep him from fainting. And I'm saying, this is hot as hell. I don't want to do this. You know, I like doing the inside stuff with a microphone more.
Absolutely. And a lot of voice actors I've talked to, they always have another VO that inspires them, like Mel Blanc and other people.
Yeah.
Do you have one in particular that inspires you?
Yeah, well, of course, Mel Blanc, I got to meet shortly before he passed away on Roger Rabbit. And he was like everybody's, vocal god, really, because he could do all of these voices. But there's another guy, when I went to Hollywood, they said, you ought to take some classes from Dawes Butler. Now, if you know Dawes Butler, he was not as well known as Mel Blanc, but he was every bit